My parents secretly sold the inheritance my grandmother left for me, believing they had erased every piece of my future. They laughed while telling me there was nothing I could do, but they had no idea my grandmother had trusted me with the one thing they could never sell. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Brinley Ashcroft. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Oregon. For most of my life, I believed that family should always come first. I wasn't the kind of person who kept score or expected anything in return when I helped the people I loved. If my parents needed money, I found a way to help. If they needed someone to drive them to appointments or fix things around the house, I was there without asking questions. I worked long hours, skipped vacations, and put many of my own plans on hold because I honestly believed we were all working toward a better future together. The one person who always noticed my sacrifices was my grandmother, Eloan. She never made a big speech about it, but every time we sat together, she would smile at me in a way that made me feel seen. She often told me that kindness was a strength, but she also reminded me that not everyone deserved unlimited trust. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. I thought she was simply sharing life lessons. Looking back now, I realized she was trying to prepare me for something she couldn't stop. After she passed away, my whole world changed faster than I could process. I was still grieving the loss of the woman who had always believed in me when my parents suddenly began making decisions without including me. Every conversation about Grandma's estate seemed rushed. Whenever I asked simple questions, I was told not to worry because everything was under control. Something about their attitude felt different. They avoided eye contact, changed the subject whenever I mentioned Grandma's wishes, and acted like I should simply accept whatever they said. I wanted to believe them because they were my parents. I kept telling myself that families don't lie about things like this. I had no idea that the people I trusted the most had already made a choice that would break my heart. At that moment, I still believed the worst thing I had lost was my grandmother. I didn't yet realize that I was about to lose the family I thought I had too. As I started thinking about everything that had happened over the years, I noticed a pattern I had ignored for far too long. My parents always had a way of making me feel guilty whenever I wanted something for myself. If I talked about going back to school or saving money for my own place, they would say, "Family sacrifices for family." Those words became their answer to everything. I believed them because I loved them. I thought helping them was simply what a good daughter was supposed to do. Every time I earned a little extra money, another problem appeared. There was always a bill that had to be paid, a repair that couldn't wait, or some emergency that only I seemed responsible for fixing. I picked up extra shifts and worked weekends because I thought we were all carrying the same burden together. Later, I realized I was carrying almost all of it alone. My younger brother, Keaton, lived a very different life. My parents never asked him to help with expenses. They never expected him to give up his plans or make difficult choices. If he wanted something, they found a way to make it happen. If I questioned the unfairness, they would tell me that he was still finding his path and that I was the stronger one. Somehow, being responsible always meant I had to give up more while he was free to think only about himself. After Grandma Aloan's funeral, everything moved so quickly that I barely had time to think. My parents gathered papers from her house, made phone calls, and scheduled meetings without telling me what was happening. Whenever I asked if I should come with them, they told me there was no need. They said they were handling all the legal matters and that it would only cause me more stress. At first, I accepted that because I was still mourning. A few days later, I asked if I could read Grandma's will. My father immediately said there was nothing important in it. My mother added that Grandma had left behind more debts than anyone expected, so there was nothing for anyone to inherit. The conversation ended almost as soon as it started. They didn't explain anything or show me a single document. They simply expected me to believe them. What bothered me wasn't only what they said. It was the way they acted. They looked uneasy whenever I asked simple questions. They exchanged quick glances before answering, and they always seemed eager to change the subject. For the first time in my life, I began wondering if my own parents were hiding something from me. I didn't have proof, only a feeling deep inside that refused to go away. That feeling stayed with me every single day, growing stronger until I finally decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. A few months passed, and I tried to focus on my work and move forward with my life. One rainy afternoon, I stopped at a small coffee shop near the courthouse before heading to an appointment. While I was waiting for my order, an older man recognized me and walked over with a gentle smile. It was Warren Bledsoe, an attorney who had known my grandmother for many years. We exchanged a few polite words, and he asked how I was doing after her passing. I told him I was managing and mentioned that my parents had said the estate had been swallowed up by debts. The moment I said that, his expression changed. He looked confused and asked, "Debts? What debts?" I thought he must have misunderstood me, but he quietly explained that as far as he knew, my grandmother's countryside property had been fully paid off for a long time. My heart started beating faster. I asked him if he was certain, and he nodded without hesitation. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. The property had recently been sold, and the sale price was close to $2 million. For a second, I couldn't speak. The sounds around me faded, and all I could hear was the pounding in my chest. I thanked him, left the coffee shop, and sat in my car staring through the windshield. I kept hoping there was a simple explanation, but deep down I already knew the truth. My parents hadn't made a mistake. They had hidden the inheritance from me and taken the money for themselves. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I had spent years believing that no matter how difficult life became, my family would never intentionally hurt me. That belief shattered in an instant. The money itself wasn't what hurt the most. What destroyed me was the realization that every reassuring word they had spoken had been a lie. The people who had raised me had looked me in the eyes and chosen deception over honesty. I sat there for a long time, thinking about my grandmother and the trust she had placed in me. Tears rolled down my face as I understood that I had been grieving two losses at once. I had lost the woman who loved me unconditionally, and I had also lost the image of the family I thought I belonged to. When I finally drove home that evening, nothing looked different outside, but inside me everything had changed. I could no longer pretend that this was a misunderstanding. Someone had stolen what my grandmother wanted me to have, and the people responsible were my own parents. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to every conversation I had ever had with my grandmother. I remembered her calm voice, her gentle smile, and the way she always seemed to think a few steps ahead. The next weekend, I decided to go through the few personal things of hers that had been given to me after the funeral. Most of them were packed away in a wooden keepsake box that had been sitting untouched in the corner of my closet. I carried it to the kitchen table and carefully opened it. Inside were old birthday cards, holiday letters, family photos, and little souvenirs from trips we had taken together when I was younger. Looking through them brought both comfort and sadness. Then I found a birthday card that I didn't remember reading closely before. It was from my 30th birthday. As I opened it again, something small slipped out and landed on the table. It was a tiny brass key wrapped inside a folded piece of paper. My hands began to shake as I unfolded the note. In my grandmother's handwriting were a few simple words. She told me that if a day ever came when something about her estate didn't feel right, I should take the key to a certain bank and ask for the safe deposit box listed on the note. She ended the message by writing that she hoped I would never need to use it, but if I did, I should trust my instincts. I stared at the note for several minutes. It felt as though she was speaking directly to me, even though she was gone. The following morning, I took the key and drove to the bank listed in the note. I was nervous the entire way, wondering if the box would even still be there. After checking my identification and the information on the note, a bank employee quietly led me into the vault. When the small metal box was placed in front of me, I took a deep breath and unlocked it. Inside were several neatly organized items. There were personal journals written by my grandmother over many years, folders filled with legal documents, family letters tied together with ribbon, and records that looked carefully arranged. At the very bottom sat a large sealed envelope with my name written across the front in her familiar handwriting. Unlike everything else, this envelope had a short message written beneath my name. It said, "Open this only when you are ready to know the truth." My heart was racing as I held it in my hands. I knew that whatever was inside had been left there for a reason. I carefully picked up the envelope, closed the deposit box, and walked out of the bank knowing my life was about to change in a way I never expected. I waited until I got home before opening the envelope. I sat at my dining table for a long time, looking at my name written in my grandmother's handwriting. Part of me was afraid of what I might find inside, but I also knew I couldn't keep living without answers. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It began with words that immediately brought tears to my eyes. My grandmother wrote that she loved me more than I could ever imagine, and hoped I would never have to read the letter. She explained that she had noticed changes in my parents over the years. Their choices had made her worry that money might become more important to them than honesty. She prayed she was wrong, but she wanted to protect me just in case. As I kept reading, every question I had carried for months started to make sense. She explained that several years earlier, she had quietly placed a valuable collection of mineral rights and investment certificates into an irrevocable trust with my name as the legal owner. She even wrote that she had done everything through proper legal channels, so no one could change it after she was gone. The family house was only one part of what she owned. She knew it could eventually be sold, but these other assets were completely separate. They belonged only to me, and nobody else had the legal authority to sell them, transfer them, or claim them. My grandmother apologized for keeping the arrangement a secret, but she believed telling anyone too soon would only create conflict. She wanted me to have something that could never be taken away through pressure or manipulation. She also reminded me that real strength comes from patience and truth, not anger. Inside the envelope was another folder containing copies of trust documents, ownership records, and contact information for the attorney who had helped prepare everything. Everything was organized so clearly that even I could understand it without legal experience. I realized this had not been a last-minute decision. My grandmother had planned this carefully years before she passed away. She had seen a danger that I refused to believe existed. For the first time since learning about the sale of the property, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt hope. My parents had believed they had taken everything from me, but they were wrong. They had only taken what they could see. The most valuable part of my grandmother's gift had always been protected. I gently folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. Then I looked at the documents one more time. I finally understood what my grandmother had been trying to tell me all those years. She had not only left me an inheritance, she had also left me a way to protect my future, even from the people who should have protected me first. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was angry, hurt, and disappointed, but I refused to let those feelings control my actions. Marching into my parents' house and demanding answers would only give them time to hide more evidence. Instead, I called the attorney whose name my grandmother had included with the trust papers. His name was Nolan Pierce, and he had worked with estate cases for many years. After listening carefully to everything I told him, he asked me to bring every document I had. We spent hours going through the papers one by one. He explained each document in simple terms and compared them with public records connected to my grandmother's estate. As he looked deeper, his face became more serious. He told me there were several things that did not make sense. Over the following weeks, his office gathered more records from the county and probate court. Every new document revealed another piece of the truth. My parents had signed papers they were not authorized to sign. Some documents contained signatures that did not match official records. Important information about my grandmother's assets had been left out during the probate process. According to Nolan, these were not simple mistakes. They appeared to be deliberate actions that violated probate laws. Hearing those words was painful, but I needed to know the truth no matter how much it hurt. Nolan advised me to stay quiet while his team completed their investigation. He said the strongest cases were built with patience instead of emotion. I followed his advice. Whenever my parents called, I acted the same as always. I never mentioned the trust, the documents, or the investigation. They sounded relaxed and confident, as if they believed everything was finished forever. From what I learned through public records, they had already started spending the money from the property sale. They remodeled parts of their house, bought expensive furniture, and planned vacations they had never been able to afford before. Every purchase reminded me that they believed they had gotten away with everything. Meanwhile, I kept meeting with Nolan and carefully organized every piece of evidence into folders. We created a timeline showing exactly what had happened from my grandmother's passing until the property was sold. Each record supported the next one. Nothing was based on guesses or emotions. Everything came directly from official documents. As the case grew stronger, my fears slowly disappeared. I finally understood that justice was not about yelling the loudest. It was about proving the truth with facts that could not be ignored. By the time Nolan told me we were ready to move forward, I knew my parents still had no idea what was coming. They believed the story was over, but for me, it was only beginning. The day the court hearings began, I felt nervous, but I also felt ready. Months of careful work had led to this moment. Nolan told me to stay calm, Answer only the questions asked, and let the evidence speak for itself. When I walked into the courtroom, my parents looked surprised to see me sitting with an attorney. They still seemed confident, almost as if they believed the case would be dismissed before it even started. That confidence slowly disappeared as the hearing moved forward. One document after another was presented to the judge. Bank records showed where the money from the property sale had gone. Property records confirmed the timeline of the sale. Probate files showed important assets that had never been properly reported. Every piece of evidence matched the next one. There were no missing links and no confusing details. The facts painted a clear picture of what had happened. My parents' attorney tried to explain away the problems as misunderstandings, but the explanations became weaker each time new records were introduced. Then the signatures became the center of attention. An expert explained that several signatures on official documents did not match authentic samples. The judge asked direct questions about who had signed the papers and why proper legal steps had not been followed. My parents struggled to answer. They looked at each other before speaking, and their stories did not always match. It was the first time I had ever seen them unable to control a situation. A few days later, Keaton was called to testify. I didn't know what he would say. For years, he had always defended our parents. But sitting under oath was different. He admitted that our parents had told him not to discuss certain financial matters with me. He also remembered hearing conversations about keeping me away from estate meetings because they believed I would ask too many questions. He looked uncomfortable as he spoke, and I could tell he had never expected those private conversations to matter one day. His testimony supported several parts of the timeline that Nolan had already built. The courtroom became very quiet as everything came together. The judge reviewed the documents carefully and asked my parents why they had failed to disclose important information during probate. They had no clear answer. Every explanation they offered was challenged by another official record. Watching it happen was emotional. I wasn't happy to see my family fall apart, but I also knew this was the result of their own choices. They had created the lies, and now those lies were collapsing under the weight of the truth. By the end of the hearings, it was clear that the story they had spent so much time building could no longer survive. The truth had finally reached the place where it mattered most, and no one could hide it anymore. Several weeks after the final hearing, the judge announced the decision. I sat quietly, holding my breath as every word was read. The court found that my parents had acted dishonestly while handling my grandmother's estate. The trust my grandmother created was confirmed to be completely valid, and the assets protected inside it legally belonged to me, just as she had planned years before. The judge also ruled that I was entitled to financial compensation because of the wrongful sale of property connected to my inheritance. Hearing those words felt almost unreal. For the first time since my grandmother passed away, I felt that someone had finally listened to the truth. My parents did not celebrate or argue. They simply sat in silence. The confidence they once carried was gone. They were ordered to repay a large amount of money and faced additional legal penalties because of their actions during the estate process. They had believed they were building a better future for themselves, but instead they lost much of what they had gained. As we walked out of the courthouse, Nolan quietly shook my hand and congratulated me. He reminded me that winning the case was not only about recovering money. It was about protecting my grandmother's final wishes and making sure her voice was respected even after she was gone. Those words meant more to me than any financial award ever could. News of the court's decision spread through our extended family. For months, many relatives had believed the story my parents told them. They thought I had been fighting over money or trying to create unnecessary problems after my grandmother's death. Some had even stopped speaking to me because they believed I was being selfish. After the court records became public, everything changed. Several relatives called me to apologize for judging me without knowing the full story. A few admitted they had always wondered why things had happened so quickly after the funeral, but never questioned my parents. Family friends who had avoided me also reached out with kind words once they understood what had really happened. I accepted their apologies, but I knew some relationships would never return to what they once were. Too much trust had been broken. As for my parents, they left the courthouse without saying a single word to me. I watched them walk away and realized I no longer felt the need to chase after their approval. The truth had finally been seen by everyone who mattered. My grandmother's wishes had been honored, and justice had been served through the law instead of anger. That victory gave me something much more valuable than revenge. It gave me peace, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt free to start the next chapter of my life. After everything was finally settled, I spent a long time thinking about what kind of life I wanted to build. I knew I didn't want to spend money trying to prove anything to anyone. Expensive cars, designer clothes, and fancy vacations never interested me. My grandmother had always believed that money should create security and help people, not become a reason for pride. I wanted to honor her by living the way she had taught me. After months of searching, I found an old farmhouse outside a quiet town. The house had been empty for years and needed a lot of work, but the moment I saw it, I felt a connection. It reminded me of the peaceful afternoons I had spent with my grandmother. I bought the property and slowly restored it without rushing. I kept many of its original features because I wanted the house to keep its history. Every repaired window, every painted wall, and every flower planted in the garden made it feel more like home. Once I settled there, I started thinking about how I could help others. My grandmother always respected people who worked hard with their hands. She believed that every honest job deserved respect. In her memory, I created a small scholarship program for local students who wanted to learn skilled trades but couldn't afford the cost. Knowing that someone could build a better future because of that support brought me real happiness. I also started a small family foundation with another purpose that was close to my heart. During my grandmother's later years, I had met many older people who had no close family to stand beside them. Some struggled to understand legal papers, while others simply needed someone to speak up for them when they felt ignored. The foundation connected those seniors with volunteers and professional advisors who could guide them through difficult situations. It wasn't a huge organization, but every person we helped reminded me why I started it. My personal life changed too. Without constant pressure and guilt, I had room to build healthy friendships. The people around me respected my time, supported my goals, and never expected me to carry their burdens. I learned that real family is built on trust, honesty, and kindness, not control. Even simple evenings sitting on my porch with good friends felt more meaningful than anything I had experienced before. Sometimes I would sit outside at sunset and think about my grandmother. I wished she could see the life that had grown from the gift she left behind. I believed she would be proud, not because of the money I had, but because I had chosen to use it with love and purpose. At last, I was living the peaceful life she had always hoped I would have, and that was the greatest way I could honor her memory. Years passed, and my life settled into something steady and peaceful. I rarely thought about the courtroom anymore, but I never forgot what led me there. One afternoon, I heard a knock at the door while I was working in the garden. When I opened it, I saw my parents standing there. They looked older, more tired, and very different from the confident people I once knew. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence felt heavy, filled with things that could never be undone. My father finally spoke first. He said they had made many mistakes, and that they were struggling. My mother's eyes were filled with regret as she tried to explain that life had become difficult for them. Then they said what I had expected deep down. They hoped I could forgive them and help them get back on their feet. I listened quietly, letting them finish without interrupting. I didn't feel anger anymore, but I also didn't feel the same connection I once had. After a long pause, I told them the truth in the simplest way I could. I said that forgiveness in my heart was separate from rebuilding trust. I could accept what had happened, but I could not return to the relationship we once had. Trust was something they had chosen to break, and it wasn't something that could be restored just because time had passed or circumstances had changed. They stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say. Finally, my father nodded slowly, and my mother lowered her eyes. There were no more arguments or explanations. They turned and walked back to their car, and I watched them leave without feeling the need to follow. After they were gone, I sat on the porch steps of the farmhouse and looked around at everything I had built. The garden was in bloom, the house stood strong, and the air felt calm. It was a life I had created piece by piece, not just from money, but from lessons that had come through pain and truth. In that quiet moment, I thought about my grandmother. I realized that what she had left me was far greater than any property or financial security. She had given me the ability to see people clearly, to stand firm when it mattered, and to choose peace over chaos. That understanding shaped every part of the life I was living now. As the sun began to set, I understood something deeply. Money can disappear, be spent, or even stolen, but values like honesty, courage, and justice remain long after everything else fades. Those are the things that truly build a life, and those are the things no one can ever take away.